Joel Smith, welcome to the Soccer Queens podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Erica.
I am happy you're here, and I've been still following along with everything you're doing and loving all the tweets that you're putting out. And I think I've just noticed a change in what you're sharing based off of you starting to coach your kids' soccer
Mhm.
teams. And I'm just really curious. I mean, you've been in this for a while, and I've been following you since the days of Speed Strength when your book came out. And I'm just curious, how has your philosophy on speed changed? And kind of give everyone a background of where you started and who you've worked with in the past and now what you're doing today.
I guess just quick background first. So I was a college track coach for 6 years so in Division III, and then before being a college strength coach for 8 years at Cal. And so in that time as a track coach, I worked with like speed and power athletes, sprinters. My fourth year coaching, I had the opportunity to coach like a national champion in the 55-meter dash. I mean, insanely talented, but I helped their improvement curve quite a bit. So I always had this. I feel like I've been obsessed with speed and jumping for so long. It's almost a thing where I did have formal education, but a lot of it is just also like an intuitive thing for me. It's just like that's something I lived and breathed for a long time. So being able to put together like the programming was pretty natural to me. The things that have in that time since, the things that have probably changed and like working with club track has been a lot more I guess you could call it the feminine side. It's just all the pieces that aren't like XYZ, do ABC, do the program like this. It's, you could say it's the emotional, but it's also like the motor learning. How do you learn? How are you motivated? What constraints or tasks are you giving to the athlete to help their technical pieces? And then blending the technical with like the strength and things like that. And so in terms of what I've been up to now, yeah. So since Speed Strength was 2018, and that was kind of at the end of, I coached track for 6 years. Then I've been a strength coach for track at that time for 3 years, and then I was working more swimming, but then I was coaching club track, and so that was almost the peak of coaching track, then strength coach for track at a D1 school, still working in club. And by the time that came out, 2018, then 2 years later, during COVID, I moved here to Ohio. I've been coaching. Actually, I'm still coaching track, high school now, but coaching my kids in, yeah, soccer and youth sports. And I think the big thing there, it's just something you don't, I think, learn till you see it. But you could see it instantly is in early levels of play. Obviously, the fast kids are the ones who have the advantage. But it's interesting because it's not just like changing my. I think that coaching youth sports has changed my perception on what fast is, because the fast kids. I've talked with Jeremy Fritch about this. Even at 5 or 6, like the fast kids are kind of fast on the field at everything. Um, like and what's interesting is like when there's stimuli in play, the ball's in play and there's things going around. The fast kid is fast at like reacting. The chaos doesn't bother them, and they can make decisions and they're aggressive going to the ball. And then what I found, what's been interesting in that, and I don't want to go too far because I'm like, man, I have so many anecdotes. Is I remember my very first season, we had like a relay race at the end of one of the practices. I think it was like with dribbling with the ball, like a dribble the ball relay race. And then we just had like a race without the ball. Kids love to race. And what I found is interesting, like the fastest kid, the kid you would say is the fastest on the team. I mean, this guy was like, an animal at 5 years old, scoring like a million goals. Like, you know how it is at 5. You get the one good kid who just destroys everybody sometimes. And but this kid was not, he actually didn't know like how to run without the ball. It was kind of weird. Like it's like he only knew how to be fast when he had the game stimulation. And so that's also has me thinking, and with kids too. Rafe Kelly, who runs Evolve Move Play, his son is an athletic beast. Like and it's cool because Rafe's kids grow up like, to me it's like they grow up the way that kids should learn sport and movement. They're doing like Ninja Warrior all the time. He's got them in like track and field type things, and all sorts of like natural parkour and like robust nature based movement learning. And his son in a track meet, I think he was 8, ran faster over the hurdles than he did in the open race. So it's like when he had a task in front of him, something to draw his attention, he could then go. So it's like we are so hardwired to move in conjunction with our environment. And I think that's the big thing is the kids who are the fastest on the field. Yes, they are good athletes. Yes, they probably have a good fast twitch muscle or structure or whatever, the things that help you. But they're also just really good at being aggressive and seeing the environment and engaging really quick. And so to me, I just see speed so much as that piece. And then all of a sudden you get like, oh, well, you are a 4 year exercise science degree. Oh, you took a speed certification. Oh, you know these marching drills. Well, you should be able to get my kid faster, right? Like, well, speed is a lot more complex than that in some ways. I think that linear speed, track speed, I do believe there is a level of speed mechanics that can certainly help athletes. I'm not saying that's not the case. I think that that stuff is helpful, but I think for team sport athletes, I think a lot of speed is built in a rich environment. Frank Frencich says, bushy. This very like it's a very rich. There's a lot of stimulation, and the better you can operate with all that stimulation, I just think that that is what ultimately makes the speed that is the most applicable later on as you move through the ranks.
Now it's interesting because today there's kind of those two extremes. You have the people that are like, okay, quote unquote, like perfect mechanics, let's get
Hmm.
them as best as possible. They're using big words that the average person doesn't get, like kinematics, biomechanics, different angle degrees. Like
Hmm.
it's like calculus almost. And then you have people on the other end who are like Tony Holler, maybe just keep it simple,
Hmm.
like let's become essentialists and just run as fast as possible, jump and do some mechanics. So, like, what do you fall in the middle of that? Or, like, when is there a place for having certain biomechanics? I mean, I just don't see a youth soccer player on the field thinking, okay, like, my knee is at this angle, like right at this moment, but
Hmm.
is there a place for that in training so it is at a good angle within that chaos, or should they just run fast and compete and have fun?
Yeah, I think that one thing that's interesting with sport is, well, one, I just think the multi-directional nature of sport, and then if it's like as well as being able to play on like different surfaces that might be a little bit messed up. Like I've come to this conclusion even in like distance running and trail running. Like I think that if everybody ran on kind of a rutted trail that had all sorts of different elevation changes and they had to be mindful of where their foot, they had to actually be aware of how their foot was landing, and things like that. I think there'd be way less like technical running instruction out there because through nature you learn. It's so much of this starts with a level of awareness. And so, with kids and like speed technique and things like that, there's two factors. I do think that the speed training, if you want to talk about like form, hey, like there's a technical bandwidth, and you should be able to run this way. A lot of that is what people go to as the marching drills. Like, let's do A skips and B skips or marches. And, but the thing is, well, one, I will say those do have, I believe those carry value, but I think there's all sorts of ways you can get that. Honestly, if you just have kids race skipping, like, I think that's a similar bucket. I don't think like the things I watch, like my children do, like they just start taking off galloping as fast as they can for no reason. Like, I think it's almost hardwired into us to move in locomotion a way that will get us to the place we need to be. And I believe that movement actually is a product of it's actually more than just, well, what technique have you been instructed in? I think it's like there's almost a level of this hardwiring to reach um, a certain level of movement proficiency. And so, yeah, I see that with kids just naturally skipping and galloping around. But so like the marching stuff, like the high knee type stuff. Now in soccer or team sport, you almost will never run with high knees, like ever. The only reason you would ever do it, well, one, two, and I'll just say this is like if you look at track, the people who do run with a high knee mechanic, almost always they're only 100-meter specialists. Every time they go to the 200 or they have to endure that running, they cannot hold on to it as well as someone who might have run with like a slightly lower or substantially, but I mean, obviously there's going to be a level of low knee lift that's just out of the story. But those super high knee lifters, and a lot of times they've kind of been coached into it, they can't maintain that. And so I believe that's a reason you see more of the low knee lift naturally happening in team sport because you have to endure whatever you're doing. And there's also like a frequency demand. So in team sport, there's team sport athletes are just higher frequency movers than track. Track is a little bit more rhythmic. You're building yourself up in a particular way. You're setting up your top end speed. Whereas team sports, get to the ball in a few yards and then set yourself up again. Even Abby Steiner, who was one of the a really like I think in track, well-known soccer track combo. I mean, she ran 21.9, I want to say, in the 200 and ran the NCAA indoor record in the 200. And she had one of the fastest cadences of all, like just insanely fast, fast cadence, and had really built her technique around that. And so, long story short, is I think that a lot of what happens running in team sport is natural adaptation. We will naturally adapt to the stimuli in front of us. Now, if you took um, a soccer player and had them do track in the off season, and you didn't even necessarily coach them that much, you would find that they would probably adapt as long as they had enough exposure racing on a track. They would find a way to adapt their stride to that. Where a lot of like the high knee stuff comes in, I think to me it helps with the vertical force and vertical stiffness component of the movement, but I don't believe that that's I think there's only so much of that you really need. Like you need like a little bit, but then beyond it, it's it's kind of a moot point. So for athletes who don't have like good foot or ankle or vertical stiffness, like the marching drills can help. But there's a lot of other stuff that can help too, just like foot and lower leg stiffness, just doing stuff in the gym, honestly, to some level, like calf type work. Um, you drop altitude drops, single leg drops, and those kind of things. So there's multiple ways to get that bucket. But I do think that like a basic march, it's fine. I just don't think it's like a magic. Um, it's not a magic thing.
I hear the argument a lot from people who support like the really focusing on high knees and the marching drills for soccer players is because they aren't getting that stimulus enough,
Mm.
and we need to train that knee position for better vertical force production, because at practice within those small scrimmages or technical drills they're in that like classic soccer slouch position and they're not like fully upright. So I'm just wondering, like, how much do we do high knees and marches? Is it, like, as warm up and just for a few
Mhm.
seconds? What do you think about that?
Yeah, yeah. I think exposing athletes to that is fine. Like doing like high knee runs in warm up or high knee skips in warm up. All that is totally fine. I think the only issue just happens when if it's like, hey, you need to run like this, because ultimately, well, one, even if you tell an athlete to run like that, they're not going to run like that in the game. Like they're going to run how they have to run in the game. I would say so with athletes in terms of if you don't have that high knee exposure to give them that. I think that goes a little bit with the vertical force thing I mentioned. Like if you don't have the vertical coordination, like to be able to coordinate the body in the vertical plane, I think that skill is definitely helpful. Um, but I would say that yeah, so something that goes with that, I was trying to figure out how to get to this. My mind is like, okay, how do I get to this? I think a big thing that people will say with team sport athletes and track, a lot of like running. I've seen like several running mechanics type organizations use this as a like a big glaring example of how your team sport athlete is running with way too much back butt kick up behind them, and we need to fix them. And now the fix is all these high knee drills and things. Um, and it was and Ken Clark, actually he's gonna be on my podcast soon, and we've chatted about this. Is Ken Clark, who does a lot of locomotion research at Southern, at with a lot of the SMU stuff and it was the SMU work. I think there's a lot with Peter Wayan, but there's a lot of treadmill studies, and there's one very glaring side by side. It's a track sprinter who's got a nice, like, relatively high knee lift and balance mechanics and good posture. And then on the right, you see this team sport athlete who's like almost falling over, like feet are flying way up behind him, barely any knee lift at all. It looks just terrible. And so you look at this and be like, oh yeah, wow, this track sprinter really runs well, and wow, this team sport athlete is horrible. But in talking to Ken, and I could tell a little bit of this even before talking to Ken, is I was like that team sport athlete is being pulled way too fast. Like you can tell that the treadmill's going so fast that person is just hanging on. And if that person was just running on flat ground, like the brain is only going to let you run as fast as you can relatively handle. Like he's just not going to run that fast. Now, um, for that particular athlete, would doing like a little bit more cyclical work, some work to help front side be a helpful idea? I think possibly. I think possibly, but I don't think there's that many. I don't think, I think people would just look at an example like that and think, oh man, like, wow, we really need to get our team sport athletes balanced out and get their knees running higher or their knees higher when they run. And I just think it's more complex than that. I know, like, I believe JB Marin, I think some others are kind of coming up with like a, an excessive kick behind like a score, like the multilateral assessment. And is it something you need to be worried about? I think once you get to the pro level and you want to measure those metrics, I think that might be something worth it more there. I think at a younger level, honestly, I think if you're just exposing athletes to some level, sure, like you can do like a marching drill and whatnot. And if they still run, it's how they run. And what I find is back to the task stimuli, though. This the thing is I don't see it so much as like how high your knee is. And I mean, yes, there is like an amount of like the foot whipping out behind the body, tail kicking that could be bad. But what I find in general is that when an athlete is on a task orientation, so like back to like Rafe Kelly's son doing the hurdles, right? He runs faster over the hurdles than just a regular race. When the brain has something to lock onto, the body tends to operate with better timing. And that's actually back to what I mentioned with like, I started with just being more mechanical, sets and reps. Now I've tried to have more of an expansive viewpoint. And one of those viewpoints is our environment's going to have a very profound impact on mechanics and then timing. And timing, in my opinion, is actually that thing that probably plays a much greater role in injury prevention than we give it credit for. Basically, meaning like when the foot hits the ground, where are the arms in space? Are the arms, when that front leg strikes, when you're sprinting, are the hands or the forearms relatively together at that instant? Is the body able to reorganize and time itself to reorganize properly? Because if it's not, that's where the injury is higher risk, and that's where, honestly, I mean, from my understanding of the research, there's athletes who it's like, oh, you shouldn't like your running mechanics say you're good, but you keep pulling your hamstring, like what's going on? So I just think and to me it's like, well, if something's wrong, it's almost those places where timing is off just a little bit. Maybe you're stressed out or overworked or there's a muscle imbalance or whatever it is. But I just think that there's a complexity to these things. So yeah, long story short is I think that backside mechanics has been, especially too, if my what I'm selling is front side mechanics or sprint drills or track leg drills, of course I want to show like, oh, here's this terrible backside, and we should do more of these. But I think at the end of the day, I'll just finish with this. I'm sorry, my mind is a little bit scattered this morning, maybe more than it typically is. But I've seen this so many times, and there was just a really just a profound example. It was like I think a pro level, like a Premier League football coach doing a warm up with the team, and it was all like the high knee stuff. It was all like the stick overhead, high knee marches, all that stuff. They probably did it for 20 minutes, all sorts of iterations. And then it's like, okay, let's integrate into play or like actually moving, like one-on-ones and dynamic agility. And instantly all the knees come down, and it's just like, so it's just the body is going to adapt to how it needs to move. And I just think that team sport needs to move in a way that's a lot more higher frequency. And so, oh, the last thing I'll say, sorry, there's a little bit with the high knees. I think the other thing that's just underrated is like a lunge switch. So like, it's like we really do focus on like the knee in front because I think what happens in front of the body is big and apparent. It's easy, but just to be able to do a lunge and then jump and switch in the air and catch on the other side, now you have a front side and a back side. So it's like, can I control my trunk in space? Can I jump and switch my legs in space? And not only can I know where my front leg is, but can I connect with my back leg? And I just think that's really underrated because, well, what makes front side? Well, it's what happens in the back coming forward. And just so I just think that's another piece that is important in the whole equation.
Just as you were talking there, I'm just becoming more and more convinced that we shouldn't be chasing this quote unquote perfect sprint
Mhm.
mechanics. And I was also thinking, I don't know if you've heard of Jason Advedijian. He works at Clemson. I think he's their head of performance right now, and he's doing a lot of research on how ACL injuries happen due to the brain and just slow reaction times. And a lot of what he's studying is very convincing. And
Right.
we used to think it was, oh, like knee valgus and a
Mhm,
girl's not landing a broad jump or a single leg jump perfectly and the knees
mhm,
wobbling. But he's starting to find in his studies that it's more that agility component of
mhm.
not being aware of the chaos and
Yeah.
not reorganizing properly like you said. And yeah, it's just super fascinating. And then another thing I wanted to mention was my husband posted a really funny thing on Twitter. So he works in baseball pitching load management, and he always argues baseball coaches about this whole like chasing like perfect pitching mechanics, and he's kind of against that too because he posted 3 AI pictures of 3 of his pro guys and he gave no context on Twitter. He's like, "Okay, pick apart these guys' mechanics." And all these people commented, "Oh, guy number 1, his leg's too far forward. Guy number 2, like his trunk rotation is off. Guy number 3, his lead leg is this and blah blah blah." And everyone was just criticizing the
Mhm,
mechanics. And my husband then comments, "Okay, well, all 3 of these guys throw over 100 miles per
mhm.
hour. Explain that." And I think the same thing is with sprinting. You have some pro athletes who wouldn't have textbook perfect form according to certain people out there who are selling these biomechanics speed courses, and they're like the fastest runners. But then the people who sell these biomechanics courses will say, "Well, they're at a really high injury risk." And I'm like, "Well, do
Mhm.
we want to like decrease their performance and kind of mitigate that injury risk by even just like 2%?" Like, I'm still wrestling with this, which is why I wanted to have you on because
Mhm.
it's just so interesting that just everyone's mechanics are just so off. I mean, if you see someone jogging down the street, everyone has knee valgus. It's
Yeah,
like
oh, yeah.
it's almost like cringeworthy, but it's like, is that really the problem though?
Yeah, that's so awesome. You'll have to send me the name of that researcher with the injury-related perception after. I because
Yeah,
I feel like
you
I
might see him on Twitter, Jason Avedijan, PhD.
okay.
I've talked about him in both of my books at length on the ACL research. I mean, it's just so fascinating. And yeah, his argument is, look, if we have faster reacting athletes, not only are we going to have higher performers at their sport, but we're going to have healthier performers. And it's just, it's amazing, which is why I'm just so excited about educating parents on, hey, sign your 8-year-old up not for a coach who's drilling B skips and A skips. Sign your 8-year-old up with a coach who's playing tag and
Yeah.
racing and dodgeball and tug of war and rock climbing in their gym,
Mhm.
whatever. Like, it's just I'm so passionate about getting this
Yeah.
out there. So yeah, I mean, it's just very interesting to look at.
Yeah, just with that perception injury, that kind of fits with what I mentioned about timing, because it's like, yeah, like you said, like there's so many people running that you would be like, how are you not hurt? But it's like the human body is built so well, like the body is not trying to get hurt, and it has a lot of strategies built in to prevent that. And so, yeah, I totally, it just makes sense to me, and I agree that like it's a lot of it's things that throw off the fine timing that holds us together. It's like, well,
Mm.
what throws off that? Is it a perception issue, or maybe there's some other things like stress or whatnot that work its
Do
way
you
in. But
do you think being too robotic could throw off that timing and players kind of overthinking when they're out on the field? Oh, am I in the right position? Am I landing properly? Like, if we train that too much, do they get too in their own heads maybe?
I'd be curious, that the one thing I've seen, and this is the one thing I just think that bails out players, day after day after day, is like I mentioned with the the warm up drill where everyone's doing all the high knees and stick overheads and just this big long thing, and then they go play and they just run normally, like. And I just think that's always been the thing. Even I've seen it in track, like I'll see track coaches overcoach all the high knee stuff, and then the athletes will go and just run how they want to, what feels good. I've even seen, I mean, I've seen I've seen the same thing I mentioned with the soccer. I've seen the same thing with track, like a whole like rigmarole, high knee, everything, and then go and sprint, do a fly 10, and it's low knees. So the thing that to me, and so I think that just bails athletes out a lot. But I do think that learning to the one thing I think is really helpful is learning to trust your body and to feel a range of things. I think that's instead of like, hey, your knees are low, they need to be high. I enjoy much more, and this is again a more a track type setting, type situation. I'm not sure if this is something I necessarily, although my creative engine is kind of thinking, oh, well, if I end up coaching my kids in soccer to the point where they're like, this is like more speed training appropriate. Like if I was coaching my kids at 10, I would probably do warm ups, and maybe it's like, all right, we're going to do some build ups at the end of the warm up. And build up one, maybe you run with low knees, then you run with medium knees, and run with high knees. I don't know. It's just, and they could be as simple as that. How did it feel? Okay, on to the next thing because we're soccer players. Your body, you're athletic, your body's going to figure it out as long as you're exposed to a range. Because the body, you can't give the body something that it's not going to work well with, and then throw it into a stimulating game environment, and it's not going to stick. So like when I do like technical stuff for track, I usually find a feeling associated with what I'm doing and then have an athlete operate in context of that feeling. So, yeah, I do think that that is one thing, though. I think you're right, is athletes who are over controlled in both the technical and the movement space, like to be taught your mechanics aren't good. I do think that maybe even if they're still instinctive on the field, I think it can maybe, you makes you wonder if they might hold back, because the best players don't hold back. They have swag. They're kind of in sync and in flow with the game. They're not second guessing their movements. Like any of the best players, I'm sure how they run is the last thing on their mind. It's probably way more on their strength coach's mind than their mind, or whatever. So yeah, I definitely think there's something there though.
This is such a fun discussion. So I'm taking my own notes as well. Had to get the pen out just like you. So you said you want athletes to feel different ranges. And are there some other things we should be chasing here if we want to develop fast youth athletes? Should it be like getting them jumping in like a gamified setting, getting them racing in a gamified setting? What is the best for the youth athlete of today?
Yeah. So I think that just from excuse me. Um, I think I guess there's two answers maybe to that. I guess there's like speed, and I guess speed that's robust in the sense like you're going to be running at a relatively good efficiency, a non-injury type situation. I think from a game speed perspective, it's all about perceptual, and I look at it so much. It's kind of funny. It almost works in reverse in some ways. Like we talk about, I guess, first world problems, like like um like you go to Africa and like people there are like super happy, like they're authentic and happy, and then we have all our own like problems here. But I think there's also there's environmental and learning problems that happen when you have everything and you have all perfect environments, because like the best athlete, it's interesting. I think Stefan Jones, who's a um, cricket pitching coach, has mentioned this. Like it's almost like we've seen the death of the natural athlete in some ways. Well, what is the natural athlete? Like I think it's good to go to that first. It's almost like it's like the Pele growing up in like the favelas, like just playing, one just for the pure love of the game, but you learn the game from like the older kids, or like you're not being sat there taught it like in rote manner. You're learning through play and exploration and playing with different people on different surfaces. Maybe some of the times with a ball you just rolled out there, and you probably maybe your shoes, maybe you had to like, I don't know, like tape together your shoes or something. And so there's but Mark McLaughlin calls those some of these things like economic constraints, or like hockey. If you didn't have an extra pair of skates, you had to go with felt boots or something, and you learn to experience the ice in a new way. And so, long story short, free play is absolutely the answer. But it's also like how rich is it's like a richness of free play, it's and that's just where it's funny because I always used to think if Jeremy Frisch would talk about his dream was to have like these free play centers for kids. It's like these huge gyms and kids could just go and hang out. And I just think that if you wanted to talk about perceptual, like, richness, I just think that that for kids is really, it's hard to beat that. It really is. So just trying to be mindful of different ways for kids to be able to get into those experiences. But then within practices itself, just realizing that like speed training, anything that's even linear, even I mean, I still have mixed opinions on like change of direction and things like that. I just think the top of the hierarchy for that is always perception. Like I know top speed coaches I've talked to with their own kids, they aren't doing all the little like, oh, cut like this. They're just having them make decisions. They're having them react to stimuli, and they're having them engage with stimuli in different ways. And how many ways can you react to this? And honestly, if you learn to react to stimuli in a bunch of ways, your technique hopefully should come along with it. Like just the same way I kind of mentioned, like kids skipping and galloping, they're trying to hone their own locomotion. And then from a robustness standpoint, I think a lot of that actually is a good strength program. Not necessarily like heavy squats and deadlifts. I mean, a basic level of strength, but I mean, I would say in like 80-90% of kids you see it, oh, that kid runs funny. Probably more than that, to be honest. There's just something that's off from like a strength imbalance or a neuromuscular perspective. My colleague Jeff Moyer, he does a lot with like motor learning, neurological issues. Like if a kid has like a reflex that shouldn't be there, or something is going on neurologically. A lot of these are actually linked to even like learning disabilities and things like kids who run like ugly. We could say. um, a lot of it's not because they need to do more of any sort of drill or even anything that I could offer them. It's a neurologically rooted thing, and they're a lot of us would say, oh, they're just motor morons or something. They're not a great term. They're they need a speed coach, but it's really they have like a neurological thing. And there's some basic things even with a strength program that can even just like balance, even like standing on one leg barefoot for extended periods of time and like swinging the other leg around and being challenged in your balance, stuff that's very basic. But even within that strength program, basic things like lunge patterns and can you throw a medicine ball and use all your joints well? And can you do it backwards and forwards? And can you move and lift and jump in a variety of ways? And are you reasonably strong? Maybe not necessarily maximally strong, but are you reasonably strong in basic human patterns? And I think that being decent at that can check off a lot more boxes than people would think. Especially just a good lunge pattern. Just being able to do and I'm always amazed by how many athletes when I say, "All right, we're going to do lunges," like I'm coaching track now, high school track. And you get a few who could do lunges well, but it's pretty amazing the amount of athletes who really struggle with that. And so I would look to those things first, before coming in and saying things about, oh, we need to get you doing this type of sprint drill and sprint work and things like that.
And what about ladder drills? I get the argument a lot that it works on coordination, but I feel like any strength movement works on coordination and like
Yeah.
even just jumping rope or bear crawling or climbing a tree, that's coordination. I
Hmm.
don't get why ladders are attached to, oh, it helps our kids with coordination. It's like, yeah, maybe, but that's not a bang for a buck that I would pick.
Yeah. I kind of have mixed views on ladders. I think the ladder is one of those things that I think like I've seen ladders used horribly. I remember when I first moved back to Ohio, there was this guy, I think he was like a former pro football player on some level running like this is like a speed class for kids. And I mean, it was just everything you'd expect from a speed class for 6 to 10-year-olds. I mean, it's a bunch of kids who, like Jeremy Frisch says, they're doing the most athletic things before the class even starts, which is playing tag and doing cartwheels and running around. Then the class starts and it's like the coach is showing them, all right, let's run through the speed ladder. And I'm just like, I guess I think about, like, the richness of it, like, and that's just a term, like, is it rich? Is it, bushy? Like, that's the nature of the hippie ways to say, is it bushy, you know? And it's not very rich if it's, "Hey, do the speed, 1 in a box, okay, 2 in a box, okay," like, side to side. There's some value, but, I mean, even, like, lower leg and foot strength, there's something happening there. I won't say there's not, but it's almost like there's a threshold. Like, once you get to a particular level of performance, I don't know, maybe it's like 13 or 14 years old. You already have those basic abilities that more speed ladder probably is not going to punch through that threshold and give you anything new that you don't already have, if that makes sense. So, but as I've seen, good coaches can make that ladder come to life. They can make it richer. They can make it bushier or whatever, you know. And so one thing I'll give a few examples is one. I like watching Mac McClung's won the last two dunk contests. I mean, he's not even like an NBA guy. They just kind of like throw him in there, up from the G League, and he can fly. And they show his training from when he was like basically a kid growing up. His dad like coaches him, and he trains in his basement. And one of the things he has down there is a speed ladder, and he's doing all like the drills. But it's actually, excuse me, there's something there. It's one thing to do a speed ladder when the coach rolls it out and says, "All right, do this pattern." It's another thing when it's your basement. It's like your training sanctum, and you're like ripping it. It's like single leg as fast as you can because that's like max effort, fast single leg plyos. And if you watch Mac's feet, his feet and ankle, like, you could tell he's got really, really springy feet, and I'm sure a lot of it's genetic and just came from playing basketball and all that, but I would say it's almost like when something also has a personal effect, I do think there's something that could be beneficial there. But then I'll go beyond that to say, one of the more practical, and I've experienced this in person, Paul Cater, who's been one of my mentors in all things like rich and immersive training, he just puts music on and has people like do dance patterns to it. And now again, we talk about it, oh well, you're just doing speed ladders, just like Dance Dance Revolution. Well, okay, sure. But he does it in a way that it's stimulating. So I'm actually being more stimulated by doing this. And then he turns it into racing. And by the end, you're actually feeling like rhythmic. You're feeling connected. You're feeling like your nervous system's a little more up because you're doing some things to music. And then you actually do a version of it that ends up in a sprint, or you're like mirroring someone else and you race, and you do end up feeling faster and more connected, and you had fun. And that's the thing too, is like if athletes are having fun and feeling connected and they're engaged, then I think it's fine. But I think if you say, well, this is the only speed training, well, no, it's like it's a really cool warm up. If you treat it richly, it can be a rich warm up, but you always have to integrate it. You always want to, hey, we're gonna actually sprint after this. We're gonna actually do dynamic one on ones or 2v2s after this, or whatever. Like so. I think if it's used that way, it can be fine. But yeah, and then along with what I said with Mac, I think if it's like a single leg, really rapid fire single leg emphasis, I do think there is some good value there from just a general foot stiffness quality piece. And I think it's that foot stiffness quality that does fit really well with like, hey, fast change of direction capacities. And just the last thing I'll say too is I do think, people make fun of it for dancing, but I do think there is something to like having a rhythmic, because there is something rhythmic even about playing, like you're catching the rhythm of the person you're with. And maybe this is me in basketball because I think it's easy, you have balls bouncing and things. But there is something that is rhythmic, I think, to motion on the field. And so I think there is something to that and people who like it for that reason. But I think that if you're gonna do that, you should be able to embrace those qualities. You should be able to feel them when you play. When you integrate it, you should also be able to feel, hey, I kind of feel this happening here. So hope that makes sense. I kind of a few thoughts stored in there that I hope came out in the right order.
Yes, it sort of changes my mind on ladders a little bit. I mean, I do see them butchered a lot just because the pace isn't there. There's no
Yeah.
rhythm. It just kind of looks like the kids are just kind of going through the motions. But
Hmm.
I do like that idea of turning on some music because then that gets people moving.
Yeah.
And it does add that rhythmic component, which is a part of speed. So yeah, I do really like that. And I just love the word bushy and richness to your sessions, and I think it's just something good to leave people with on, who you're thinking of working with for your kid, and is the session really checking the boxes of a broad range of athletic skills, physically, but also that mental component we discussed today. And I guess my last question is, you're coaching your daughter's 5 years old.
My daughter is 7 now, and my son's
Okay.
5.
Oh, okay, awesome. So very, very young. Now, you're coaching this age group. What are like maybe give us 1 or 2 games that kinda add that richness to a session that you're doing with them or maybe are their favorites?
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. I mean, free I'll tell you what, like, the one of the best, that's always the best, so, I used this on my daughter's team, when she was 5 and 6. I've handed her off to an awesome coach, so that works with her now, and then I coach my son, and so for all the 5 and 6-year-old teams, I mean, honestly, it's so simple, but the simple games are always the best, but freeze tag and then just manipulate the space, you know? So it's like, kids love freeze tag. It's for that age, and this is the thing is, to me, the art of coaching young athletes and why I think it's so important is you see what they're capable of and what will stimulate them. They're not capable of handling, like, a bunch of stuff. Like, I've seen my daughter was playing basketball, a basketball league, and I'm watching, like, her practice on one side of the gym, watching the other practice, and there's a coach, like, trying to teach second graders how to run screens. I'm like, "These kids have no idea." Like, they have absolutely no idea. So it's like, and even soccer skills, like, there's still like, there's a very rudimentary level of what these kids can handle, but if we wanna make this as stimulating, as bushy as possible, we have to use a lot of games. And so, yeah, freeze tag was probably the kids, I would say, is pretty much the favorite. There's other variations that we ran, but that was the thing with kids too, is like, I'm the type of person I like try to be creative in all sorts of different games, and it's like, well, we could just play freeze tag every time. So we would warm up, and that was something we always did before we really got the ball going, just because that was a really helpful piece there.
It's not just for the young athletes, it could be for the college kids, the pro athletes as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing. Like, so often, I know back when I was working at Cal, and just with higher level or pro athletes in general. Actually, this was the best. Is the pro? It's funny because I've never watched like the Pro Bowl. I was sitting at my in-laws' house watching the Pro Bowl one Saturday or Sunday, and it's like, it's not the Pro Bowl anymore, it's just a bunch of games. But this is like the best is watch the NFL guys play dodgeball. Like, look at the smiles on their face. It's amazing. I mean, I'm sure they're smiling when they're playing the game too a lot, but I mean, it's the game. But like just the smiles on their face, it's like a bunch of kids. Like that never leaves us. And so that was that was just really cool to see. I wish more people could notice that because I think we don't value that nearly enough. So, yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, all athletes will, and it is funny because too the laughing and giggling, they almost do regress to like when they're in middle school and elementary school, like that. Your child is always with you. Your inner child, and so I think that part that loves to play and have fun, that does need to be nurtured from time to time.
Make training fun again. That's
Yeah.
that's the motto.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Joel, this has been such a fun conversation. I hope everyone listening has learned a lot. If you want to follow Joel's work, get his book, or see what else he's got going on, be sure to check all of his links in the caption below. And I will see you on the next episode.